welcome to the latest episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Dr. Gerry Fried, who's currently the Professor of Surgery and Associate Dean for Education, Technology and Innovation, and the Director of the Steinberg Center for Simulation and Interactive Learning at McGill University. Quite a mouthful. Gerry previously served as the Chair of the Department of Surgery at McGill and the Surgeon-in-Chief. He did his residency in McGill and then, quite unusually at the time, went and did a fellowship in GI surgery and GI endoscopy at Ohio State University, and then a research fellowship at UTMB in Galveston. And he returned to McGill at that point, where he spent essentially the majority of his faculty career. He was there at the beginning of laparoscopic surgery and has really been at the forefront of development of a number of technologies, starting perhaps with enhanced recovery. He is a champion of surgical innovation and has transitioned away from being the leader of the Department of Surgery to developing a number of areas of interest in the world of technology and global partnerships. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you get the notifications of forthcoming episodes. And I'd also love to hear whatever comments you may have, so please don't hesitate in that regard. Without further ado, let's go over to the interview with Dr. Gerry Fried. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives.
So I was born in Montreal in about 75 years ago, believe it or not, and spent most of my time here in Montreal going to McGill University for undergraduate and for medical school. Then I started my residency in general surgery at McGill. One of the things that we had that was really quite unusual in those days was an opportunity for us to go away to another program for a fourth clinical year to try to complement areas that we were not so strong in our own local program. And at that time, I was very interested in becoming a GI surgeon. And as one of the skill sets that I felt was really essential, I wanted to learn to do GI endoscopy. There were no surgeons here doing GI endoscopy in those days, only the GI gastroenterology team. So I decided that I would look for an opportunity to go away for a year to a program where I could enhance my capabilities as a GI surgeon and to really learn how to do flexible GI endoscopy. Somewhat fortuitously, I was able to get a position at the Ohio State University where they were missing one of their GI fellows. And so Chris Ellison and I split a year where each of us did 6 months of GI and then 6 months on an advanced gastrointestinal surgical service where Dr. Zollinger was still operating and Dr. Larry Carey was the chair and running that service. It was an amazing year. It was a truly formative year for me in that I not only developed a skill set that was valuable for me for the rest of my career, but I met a group of people that to this day I've remained very, very close friends with. And I've had the privilege of going back to Columbus for several visits over the years, including at least on 3 occasions to the big Ohio State Michigan football game. And, that's really quite wonderful. When I finished my time there, I came back to Montreal. I did my chief year. And then I went over to Galveston, Texas to do a research fellowship with Jim Thompson. And that really arose out of the exposure that I had to Dr. Zollinger's patients with islet cell tumors and gastrinomas. Spent a couple of years in Texas and then ultimately returned to McGill, and I've been there ever since. And rose through the ranks to become tenured full professor, chair of the Department of Surgery, and we have term limits in Canada, so I finished my term as chair in 2020, just prior to COVID, and took on a new position as Associate Dean for Education, Technology, and Innovation, and director of our Steinberg Center for Simulation and Interactive Learning, which is what I'm doing now. During my, yeah,
No, I was gonna,
uh,
was there medicine in the family before you?
not really. I had one uncle on my mother's brother who was a family doctor and kind of GP anesthetist in upstate New York, um, who I saw a couple of times a year, and he was a wonderful man and role model. But he was really the only other person in our family to be a doctor.
What did your, what did your parents do?
My father was a salesman um, in a bunch of different areas. Mostly in the clothing area. But towards the end of his career, he worked a lot with the professional sports teams, and he sold uniforms and stuff. So that was kind of a fun thing. I got to know some of the players and teams through that. My mother was trained as a school teacher, but she really was mostly a housewife for most of her life.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned, back in the day, McGill anyway had that opportunity to spend a year away, which, as you say, is pretty unusual and still pretty unusual. Uh, you know, when I speak to people either on or off the podcast who have been somewhere for a year, either just somewhere different or overseas or wherever, it's inevitably considered to be an enormously positive experience. It's a little more difficult than it used to be nowadays, but it's not impossible. Are you a fan of people going away? Do you think they should always go away?
I'm a very big fan, and I think back to my own career. That first time going to Columbus was very, very important to me. But I also had the opportunity to do a James IV traveling fellowship for 6 weeks. Went to Hong Kong, Australia, and Western United States, and it was extraordinarily valuable in terms of really spending time with world leaders, spending time in the operating room with them, getting to know their healthcare system. Very, very valuable. And then the other thing that happened somewhat fortuitously, and maybe we could talk about it, was I had the opportunity in 1989 to meet a visitor who was working on a book on surgical research with my chair at that time, Dave Mulder. And I happened to just walk into his office that Saturday, and Dr. Mulder introduced me to Hans Treudel, who was there from Cologne, Germany. And Dr. Treudel said, I just started doing this new operation. It's called laparoscopic cholecystectomy. I said, yes, I've heard about it. He said, why don't you come to Germany, stay with me, and I will teach you this operation and it will change your life. And I took him up on that. And I went to Germany. He was wonderfully hospitable. I got a chance to spend time with them in the operating room in the very early stages of lap chole,
Yeah.
and then came back, and it truly did change my career. So these opportunities, sometimes, they're structured and they're part of your career. Other times they fall as an opportunity that just comes up by chance. But you're so right that, taking advantage of them is very important.
And it's always, it's, as we know, it's a small world. Hans Treudel and I were both very lucky to be awarded the honorary fellowship of the Glasgow College on the same day, uh,
Oh, yeah.
uh,
Uh-huh.
with actually also with Jonathan Meekins.
Hmm.
So it's a small world. Now, you mentioned in Canada you have term limits, and some places do, some places don't. Um, are you a fan of term limits? I have to declare self-interest here in saying that I'm personally a fan of term limits for chairs, etc. But are you a fan, or What do you think? I mean, you had to get booted out at an appropriate time. Would you have liked to have stayed on?
Well, I think I am a fan of term limits, and I think there's two reasons for it. First of all, from your own perspective, there's a certain urgency to get things done. And you have the most energy and the most kind of innovative thinking early on in your term. And after a while, it starts to become more, you just kind of manage the things that you've developed. So when I took that position, I really had a plan and the things that I wanted to accomplish. And I invested a lot of energy in doing them. We could talk about those later. I think from the perspective of the department, it's also very important because no matter who you are and how good you are, you have a particular skill set and you will help develop that skill set, maybe that area clinically, that area of research. But there may be some other areas that will flag under an individual. So having the opportunity every 5 to 10 years, so we have 5 year terms renewable once, to then look at the areas that truly need to be developed better and to choose a person with a skill set for that particular time and that particular need, I think is good for the department.
The I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I'm intrigued by your comment that having the limit, let's say it's 10 years, be positive and say 10 years, it focuses the mind saying, okay, the clock is ticking. I have to do
Yeah,
deliver my vision in the next 10 years. I've always also viewed that I think it's quite difficult to be at the top of your game for forever. Yes, 10 years, maybe even 12 or 15, but I have a hard time believing people are truly at the top of their game for 25 and more years. That's just my personal view. Now, the other thing I was going to say, the late great Cy Schwartz um, was a good friend to me when I was in Rochester, and we used to talk a lot about stuff, stuff that stuff that matters, maybe. But I remember him telling me that throughout his entire tenure as chair, not once did he have a conversation with the dean about money, and that was simply because in his day the clinical dollar was very powerful, and his faculty earned enough money to run the department and more. Um, and so I've always got the sense that in Cy's day, perhaps being a chair was a little easier going, whereas now it's every day is a crisis, and it's usually around finances and the challenges of the world. My point in this long-winded introduction is to say, uh, I think it's even more so, more true that term limits, it's a tougher job now, and maybe it shouldn't be allowed for in infinity, if you like.
yeah. I I mean, certainly in the Canadian system, there are lots of challenges financially. There have been for a longer time, perhaps than there have been in the States. And there's two different areas. So my position was clinical chief. So I have a hospital responsibility and an academic chair. And there are some competitions. They don't always align
Yeah,
totally. And the opportunities for funding are also somewhat different. Um, but I do think that one of the things you learn pretty quickly is that there's some aspirations that you have when you go to the search committee that you're not going to be able to do in the real world because there are limitations. And so banging your head against the wall about those is not going to be very fruitful. But I think there are certain things that you're able to accomplish. And even in a financially tight situation like we had when I was chair, there were areas, and actually in developing those areas, we're able to bring in revenue that was able to, to build our academic mission. So what I focused on was building a graduate program in experimental surgery, master's and PhD program. And in order to do it, we established new programs in innovation and entrepreneurship, in global surgery, in surgical education, and surgical recovery, and then finally in digital surgery. And we increased our graduate students from about 30 to over 220.
Wow.
And then I was able to go to the university and say, look at all the revenue we're able to bring in from graduate students, and I want to bring this money into the recruitment of academics, so essentially full-time tenured scientists within our department. And so it didn't cost any more money. It just allowed us to make an argument, basically a business case, to be able to support the academic mission. And if I look back to my legacy as a department chair, that's the thing that I think I was proudest of.
You're answering all my questions now, legacy and things like that.
Yeah.
So over your, because you spent essentially most of your career in Montreal and McGill, what's been you're looking back, and we'll call it the autumn of your career. What's the biggest change now from when from that Lap Coley day? What's been the biggest change in the life at McGill and the life of the surgeon?
Well, certainly one of the changes was the high degree of subspecialization that's evolved over my career. So I was trained as, I would say, as a GI surgeon. There's no such thing as a GI surgeon anymore. I would say even within our colorectal group, your colon and rectal surgeon, there is subspecialization, the IBD people, the cancer people, et cetera. So the incredible specialization that's occurs. I think also the true understanding of what it means to say value in surgical care. And as money becomes tighter, I think the importance to demonstrate value. And that comes up particularly in a program like we had, which was globally funded. So you have a pot of money that you have to run the clinical mission over the year, and that money pays nurses' salaries, it pays for instrumentation, it pays for the robot, right? And so then you have to decide, okay, I'm going to do hernias with a robot, but the cost of that has to be found somewhere else. So do you close an operating room? You shut down nurses' salaries? These are the type of value-based decisions that you have to make. And to me, that was a huge evolution. At the beginning, you just got what you wanted. You asked for it, you used it. You really didn't have to justify it other than maybe having a good pitch and showing some passion. But it's not like that anymore. And I think that creates a certain responsibility and rigor in the process of opting into new technologies.
So, as you say, value and catchphrases like value-based purchasing and stuff like that are the modern way, and you say it was not like that, and it was not like that. On the face of it, it would seem rational and better that value might play a role. I remember Ara Darcy saying to me, all we're asking for is maybe just a little bit of value for what the NHS invests. But as you know, it's like an irregular French verb. Not that I speak French very well, but value towards rationalization, towards rationing, towards death panels, depending on what part of the world you live in. And that's one of the stark differences between Canada and the USA, and also, the UK and the USA, et cetera, et cetera. None of these systems have it quite right. And do you think value is being delivered, or is it just rationing and cost containment? What do you think?
So I do think when you have a limit, it's a little like running your own household. You have a certain amount of money and you're thoughtful about how you're going to spend that money. And so there is a responsibility that you have. And that responsibility leads to some analysis or the use of evidence. It's not, you don't jump on every bandwagon that comes your way. Is it true that it could stifle innovation? I would say it depends on the mindset. I think, in fact, when you are pushed a little bit, you actually increase innovation. I'll give you an example from our own program. One of the things that we did is we invested in technology in the operating room and we cut our beds, okay, because it's the same pool of money. How did we manage cutting our beds? We really got to be leaders in the enhanced recovery after surgery program. We shortened the length of stay. At the same time, we improved the patient satisfaction. Most of our patients were delighted to sleep in their own beds. We sped up their recovery, not only in the hospital, but their time to get back to work and to those activities they liked. And we did it without increasing the morbidity or any of the complications associated with surgery. And we started it in one area, and over time we brought it to other areas. It helped us communicate better with our patients, to start a patient education program. And so I do think that sometimes when you are under some pressure, uh, uh, you actually are much more disciplined in your approach.
So I remember talking not that long ago to um, your faculty member and my former fellow Larry Lee, who said that the same thing happened in relation to the development of same-day colectomy.
Mhm.
It simply became necessary in order to be able to do the operations in the middle of COVID, etc. So, as you say, um, necessity is the mother of invention. Sometime. Um,
Yeah.
so, um, as you come to the mature phase of your career, we will come up with all of these various euphemisms. Um, when you eventually step away to do whatever you want to do, what will you not miss about the job?
The hardest part of the job, I think, were the interpersonal issues, the friction between people, or bad actors, or people would keep you up at night. Clearly, I won't miss that. Also, I mean, like you said, I think the financial pressures are a challenge, and it never ends. So you get compression, you respond to it with innovation. They say, oh, maybe we'll just cut you further. It's like a spring that gets tighter and tighter. That I won't miss. Um, but honestly, I enjoy what I do so much. I enjoyed what I when I was clinically active. I'm enjoying what I'm doing now on the more in the teaching simulation and do some research in AI. That I don't know when the point is where I will completely walk away from it. I do think there's a point where we have to transition from being active and busy clinically, and let that work be done by the younger, more robust people that have the energy to do that. But as long as the brain functions and you have experience and a good perspective on life, I do think that you can transition from one phase of your career to another and still add value.
Jeff Matthews said to me in an earlier interview that he was in favor of some form of assessment, psychomotor cognitive assessment, starting formally at an arbitrary age, whatever, 60, 65 or whatever. And the concept being that let's try and make sure people don't continue when it's long beyond time to stop certainly operating. Did you have Was it built in for you that you had that transition, or did you have some way of working out? Was there a friend or who might tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, Gerry, listen, maybe it's time."
So I would say the hardest thing that I had to do when I was chair was to get some of my senior people to agree to stop operating. And these were people, since I trained there,
Yeah,
these were people that were often quite, important in my own career. They were great. They were at the top of their game, and they were well known not only at McGill but internationally. The thing that struck me was that they had lost their insight,
yeah.
and that they did not appreciate the fact that they were no longer the surgeon that they had been in their peak. So I decided just arbitrarily, I set an age when I was going to retire, and that was 70. And I did speak to my colleague, who's now my chair, Leanne Feldman, and I said, if that I will stop operating at 70. But if you find that I am have lost my skills to the point that I should stop or change the type of practice I do, I need you to tell me that, because I was worried that I would also lose the insight into when I should stop. Fortunately, she never had that conversation with me, and I think she would have. I know her well enough that she's a pretty honest and straightforward person. But I did go through that, because it's very painful to have that conversation otherwise.
So, with that in mind, it's you in the in the the confines of McGill, you had to have that conversation. So it's not an enormous sample size, indicative that such things happen. So do you think everybody should have a buddy? As part of should the chair make sure that after 60, every surgeon has a sort of a named buddy whose job it is quietly, not to hover, but to be the person. Hey, would you keep an eye on this? Because not that many, too many people don't have that conversation.
It's a challenge. I think there are different ways people could do it. There are some places that have mandatory retirement age,
Right.
and therefore it's not personal. You reach that age, and there's not a question. That's one way to do it. Although I think nowadays people are living longer, and they could make important contributions past, say, 65 or whatever age you decide to. But that's one option. What Jeff Matthews said is another, that you could take some type of psychomotor test. I mean, we don't even request a physical examination and an eye test,
Yeah,
um, to maintain your license in surgery. You probably, you wouldn't get a driver's license without,
yeah.
at least making sure that your eye sight is still good, reflexes, etc. Um, whether you do a FLS test or some sort of simulation based test, um, you know, we have to think about these things if we are not going to have either a voluntary retirement based on the conversation, or a mandatory retirement based on age. Because even if you identify somebody, um, at the time where that conversation occurs, you may change, your personality may change, you may lose your insight, your memory may flag, and you may rebel against that. And therefore, how do you arbitrate that? I mean, is it a written contract that when, John Monson says to me that it's time that you stop, Gerry, that okay, you're going to have to stop, and you can't refute that by contract? I think there are different mechanisms, but I don't think we should ignore that. I think there should be a mechanism so that we don't have to treat each case as an exception or as an individual.
Well, I agree, but there's an additional point also. I mean, you have been fortunate to be able to transition to another role. Statistically, the overwhelming majority of surgeons don't have that opportunity. They work in community settings, non-academic settings, hospitals, etc. That they are there as income generators for the organization, or in which is the same really, whether it's in the US, Canada, or the UK. They're there. It's a transaction to undertake the work. Um, I had a very good friend in London who was a chair of surgery who said to me many years ago that, I gave up operating because I knew I was no good at it, but I was able to step back and focus on the molecular biology lab that we had. I've always had sympathy for the surgeon that doesn't have that escape route, because if they have insight, it can't be easy operating, with at least an inkling that you're not very good at what you're doing. And that's very stressful.
It's true. I think the person as they're kind of maturing through their surgical career needs to think about that transition with the same type of attention that they pay when we go into our specialty. We give a lot of thought about where we're going to train, what we're going to train, what we want to do with our career. But this is an important transition, and I think people that don't give it its due thought really suffer from it. I mean, if you walk away and you don't have a lot of outside interests and you don't have another kind of professional transition to make, then it's people deteriorate very quickly. They get depressed. They feel that they've lost their relevance, their self-esteem flags, and there's not a need for it in most cases. As long as you have the health, it doesn't have to be your professional career. I was lucky that I found another kind of job within my department that I was really quite excited about, and it was a continuation of work that I've already done, and I felt I could give back. But equally important, I think, if you have a passion in terms of hobbies, the arts, sports, then you have an opportunity to engage in that in a much more active way than you have time for in your career. And that could be very, very rewarding.
That's very true. And we'll come on to that in just a moment. The only difference, of course, is that one pays you a salary and the other doesn't.
You have to plan for that.
Yeah. Well, that's true, but in the last few years, there's been one or two financial collapses that have made that challenging for some people. But seeing as you raised it, it's a nice pivot. So, what are the interests of Gerry Fried outside of OSCEs and simulation and academic surgery?
So I've always had, I think, a good balance between what I do professionally and my personal life. And it's not just one thing. I can't say that I'm just totally driven in one area, but I love people. Okay. And, if I look back on my career, the people I've met along the way, the friends that I've made are really important. And I think, continuing to maintain relationships with people, and that is also through traveling and seeing the world has been very important to me and my wife. So we travel a lot, and we try to connect with people that we've met along the way with those travels. And that's rewarding, both in terms of allowing you to maintain those friendships, but also to see the world through the eyes of people that actually live in those places. Also, through the travels, I love to I love good food. So we actually search out and try to expose ourselves to some of the great restaurants of the world. I think of a great meal like a piece of art, but it's ephemeral. It's there. It attracts all the senses, and then it's gone like in a couple of hours, and all you have are the lingering memories of that meal. But I think that it's something that we just love, and so we continue to travel the world in search of the ideal or the perfect meal. Another area is I play tennis. I love it. I play probably 4 times, 5 times a week, and so as long as my body holds out, I'll continue to do it. And I have to say that I'm not all that good at it, but I enjoy it. And I've also had the opportunity to play internationally for Canada in some tournaments. So that's been fun. I usually lose them, but I still get to play and visit tennis clubs in other countries that I enjoy.
Does sound like you're nonetheless better than the people that were not picked.
Well,
Um, no, so that, I mean that is, as you say, these are important things um, that become more or less important depending on where you are in the phases of your career. But I think most people would understand that if you emerge, it is not good to emerge from a career and go cold turkey with no other interests. It's, I think everybody understands that it's very, very, very challenging. Um, so you were fortunate that you were in the right place at the right time for the advent of minimally invasive surgery. Um, and I've asked people over the last um, number of interviews, what's been the biggest change and in their career, and a lot of people say minimally invasive surgery and reducing hospital stay through multiple strategies, etc. And I think everybody understands that that's probably true in the world of surgery. And before that, it was probably diagnostic imaging, etc., that really revolutionized things. So surgery wasn't the blind art that it once was. So my question to you is, tell me what's the next big thing for the next 25 years?
so I mean, clearly, image-guided surgery was transformative, and to me, the next step is data. Is basically data-driven surgery that's layered on image-guided surgery. So we already have the capacity to see inside the body, and we collect. We could record our images, etc. But now with the advent of computer vision AI, we're able then to take what we do in the operating room, more accurately document it, and be able to milk that information for analytics. And some of the research projects that I'm working on now are exactly that. In so many cases, the record of what we do in the operating room is very both incomplete and inaccurate, the operative report that we rely on. And I don't have to tell you as a colorectal surgeon that what we do in the operating room matters, so that if you do a good mesorectal excision, you're more likely to have better quality of life, better survival, lower rate of local recurrence, etc. But I also bet that if you look at everybody's OR report, particularly before it was validated with pathology findings, everyone said I did a complete mesorectal excision. And that's the operative report. And if you relied on that, then you would say, well, maybe it's not so good, or maybe only in some people's hands is this thing real. But if you look at the video is the ground truth of what we do. And so if we video every case and we take from the video analytics that tell you, have you met these elements of a proper mesorectal excision, or what elements that you've met are related to outcomes, then we will develop our techniques and audit our techniques to the point that we will really improve what we do in the operating room. And I think that as surgeons should be a very strong aspiration. And we are at the cusp. I mean, you just look back at ChatGPT over the last couple of years and how rapidly it's progressed. And I would tell you that the area of computer vision has advanced to that point equally rapidly. And it's part of our culture then to say, okay, I will routinely video what I do in the operating room, and I will learn from that information, and that will help generate the data about the relationship between what we do in the operating room and outcomes, and what are the best practices that we want to train our next generation of people to adopt in their work.
Do you think there's a possibility that the analysis of that data, assuming the data becomes available, as in universal recordings and then an analysis using some form of AI platform, is there a danger that the platform will announce to the organization Dr. Jones should no longer be operating?
It's not the platform. It's us and how we want to use the platform, right? So I, you know, if if I were a pilot and the information that was being recorded suggested that I was being cavalier with the safety of my, of the people on my plane,
Yes.
I would think that society would expect that we would respond in a way that we would change that person's behavior. I don't think, I mean, we've been a very privileged profession, and I think that we deserve it to a great extent, but we also are beholden to the public that we serve. And because we have the privilege of regulating ourselves as professionals, we also have the responsibility to ensure that we provide the quality that the population deserves, and that we monitor that quality, and that we come up with guardrails to ensure that outliers are, are caught. And you know, it, a radiologist doesn't read an X-ray, come up with a report, and then destroy the X-ray, right? I mean, because they're worried that they may make a wrong interpretation. Or a pathologist doesn't, shatter the slides because someone else might review those slides. I mean, I do think that what we do in the operating room, um, we do the best we can. Maybe it's the legal system that needs to change, but we do the best we can. I think we should document what we do properly, and that this information is valuable in terms of someone's covering your patients. Do I take that patient back? They're not doing so well. I could look at the anastomosis.
Yeah.
It should be part of everything we do. I feel very strongly about it. We really incorporate that in a lot of what we do here at McGill. And I think that if you asked me the question, I may be a little long-winded, but I'm quite passionate that the next thing is going to be managing the data of what we do in the operating room. We either own it or someone's going to own it for us. So we should get engaged in it.
So you think if sooner rather than later, when we log on to the electronic medical record, we can check the CBC and the CT scan report and then click on the video of the operation? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I could certainly give you examples of how that could be done, how the operative report could be generated automatically from the video, how the coding could be generated from the video, and that the operative report then gets linked to the operative
Yeah.
video. So you click on where it says the anastomosis was created without tension, and you actually can see the anastomosis and say, oh. So yes, that technology is ready for prime time. It's not widely used, but I do think within the next year or two it will be.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I think we have for now, almost 30 years ignored the reservoir of video imaging. It's 1990 or sometime around then that,
Right.
quality images, and they're still not recorded. Mind you, the world is, one of my colleagues did a fistulotomy on a patient yesterday, and this morning the patient was still in the PACU, declining to go home, supposedly because of discomfort. And my resident came to me today to say that he'd been down to see the patient. The nurses said that he'd been on his cell phone using Chat GPT to, he'd looked up how to convince doctors to keep you in hospital, things to say. So,
It's a brave new world.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, look, not all technology is good, right? I mean, it's how we use it, but I think we should take leadership in how we could use it to optimize the quality and safety of our surgical care.
All right. Now for the last few minutes, I'm going to pivot to some simultaneously deep and profound questions that require a more rapid fire answer. So What happens when we die?
I have no idea. I don't give it a lot of thought, quite honestly. I'm not a particularly a religious person, so I would just say I don't know.
That's fair enough. I'm not sure that anybody has the factual answer to that. You said you like food. What is your favorite food?
Um, there are a few. I think fine French food and Japanese food would be at the top of my list.
And favorite movie?
I'm not a big movie goer, so I don't know.
You can.
I did watch Ex Machina. It's a science fiction like AI movie recently. I was kind of intrigued by it. It's an old movie, but it got me thinking a lot about where we're going in terms of relationships.
If you had to spend a month on a desert island, what book would you bring?
What book? Probably War and Peace. I need something to fill my time.
Have you ever asked anyone for an autograph?
Um, yes, I have.
And
Um, I gave it to my granddaughter.
who was the autograph?
It was her favorite hockey player, Cole Caulfield from the Montreal Canadiens. She's a big fan of his. I can't remember asking anyone for an autograph for myself. I don't know what it means to get an autograph, but it was important to my granddaughter. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Means something to some people, obviously.
yeah.
Uh, you said you travel a lot and eat well, but do you have a greatest extravagance apart from that?
I don't think so. Um,
That's enough, by the way. You know,
yeah, I mean, I pretty much use up my budget with food and travel, and no, I don't feel that I'm extravagant.
do you have a second home?
No, we did for a while, but we no longer
What,
have that. I found it held me down,
yeah.
so we rather be able to just get up and go and
So let's assume that you do again have a cabin in the woods somewhere.
yeah.
Uh, you're spending a weekend there, not just a day, but a weekend. What three people from history, alive or dead, would you be like to spend the full weekend with?
Well, from history, alive or dead. So I guess Da Vinci. I mean, everybody he kind of has so many different attributes that I think there's so much to learn from him.
Would you
Uh,
watch him or would you want to ask him something?
I think to speak to him about. I mean, one of those people that had such diversity of talent and such excellence in each of the areas in which he explored. I think that
Who's going to be his roommate?
an astronaut. So I do know some because we do some work with the Canadian Space Program. There's some of the most fascinating people that I've met, and they see the world in a completely
Different way.
different way.
Would you have one you would choose in particular or just one from the lineup?
I mean, I know a couple of them, so spending time with them is great. But I think probably anyone who has spent substantial amount of time either in the space station or in away from the Earth and kind of think about life from that perspective. Um, but also they're multi-talented people, so you don't get there just by being a good surgeon or a good engineer or whatever. Again, a little like Da Vinci, they're the breadth of their expertise is remarkable. But also, most of them can communicate extremely well. So they're kind of like a John Monson. You have a conversation with them; it's a very rich conversation.
Not sure about that, but you're right. I mean, they have to have multiple talents. I mean, there's no undergraduate course in astronaut, yet. I mean, they come from a different background. So who's the third person then?
Churchill,
Churchill, you're the second person to say that.
yeah. Maybe because I just watched, a biography of him, so it's a little fresh in my mind. But obviously the things that he went through, the kind of the depth of horror of war, but his ability to use words, spoken language, to influence people at times of crisis. I'd love to learn from him. I think that one of the things about leadership is not just having a great vision, but being able to articulate it in a way that brings other people on board and gives them the same enthusiasm for the vision as you have. And I think when I look at leadership, Churchill's example, he wasn't a perfect man by any means, but what he was able to do in difficult times was probably changed the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think to coin a phrase, he's a multifaceted personality
Hmm.
amongst some of the greatest contributions, and at times a fairly horrendous individual in many respects.
Right.
Plus,
The imperfect man.
yes, plus of course, an extremely talented artist,
Hmm.
etc., and extraordinary author. So, many things. Um, if you were uh, if you were given the opportunity to ask him a single question, and he was obliged to answer truthfully, what do you think it would be?
I mean, I would really like him to reflect on his on some of the decisions he made during wartime, um, and really understand whether he believed that the outcome of those decisions would be the outcomes that they turned out to be. I mean, to reflect on that.
I saw a clip of an interview, journalists interviewing Dwight Eisenhower, and the journalist said, "Did you, did you make many mistakes during the Second World War? And were there things that you should have done differently?" And he said, "Yes, countless things." He said, "But it's hard to bet against winning." And
Yep.
at the end of the day, of course, but at the end of the day, they did win. So that the best piece of advice you ever got.
When you get to the fork in the road, take it.
Yeah.
And it's a Yogi Berraism, but I do think that one of the things we learn as surgeons is that often we have to make important decisions on incomplete information. And I think the ability to make a decision and understand that you don't look backwards, but you can alter the course going forward. And I think that that's an important piece of advice. People often wait for all the information to come in, and they delay making a decision to the detriment of the outcome.
And would it be fair to say, or is it different to the advice you would give the 25-year-old Gerry Fried?
No, I mean I do think that you go along in life and you have opportunities and you have decisions. You obviously can't leap on every bandwagon that comes your way, but I would rather leap to some than always have, there's some people that never take a chance.
Yeah.
And I do think that there are moments in life where taking a chance is extraordinarily rewarding. So thoughtfully chance taking.
Yes, exactly. Semi-educated guesses.
That's it.
Like that. Well, Jerry, listen, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day. I hope you haven't impaired the Oskies going on in the background.
Not at all.
It's been a great pleasure, and I'm sure people are going to love listening to the thoughts and wisdom you have told us today.
Well, thank you, John. Thanks for doing this. And you are a very talented conversationalist. Thank you.